What do they purport to be?
They are the photographs of the pet cemetery and the burial site that we later located Tylee Ryan.
Okay, is this the same area you testified, or is this the same pet cemetery area you testified to earlier today?
Yes.
Okay. And this is something you saw with your own eyes?
Yes.
And you saw this on June 9th and June 10th, 2020?
Yes, that's correct.
I'd ask that States Exhibits 11A through 11G be entered into evidence.
All right, any objection to any of those exhibits from the defense?
No objection.
Okay, just to keep the record clear, exhibits states 11A, 11B, 11C, 11D, 11E, 11F, and 11G have all been admitted and may be published.
Detective, can you describe what you observed in States Exhibit 11A?
This is the pet cemetery. As I earlier testified, we knew it was the pet cemetery because of the black dog statue that was next to the post.
Detective, can you, with the pointer, point out the black dog?
Sorry. Right there.
Thank you.
Also in this photograph is the fire pit that is sectioned off that we were also going through, and the blue tarps, anything of interest or evidentiary value that we dug out of the ground were placed on the blue tarps.
Thank you. Detective, can you describe what you observed in States Exhibit 11B?
As I testified earlier, when we began digging down, we could notice the difference in soil from dry soil to a moist soil, and we started to get into clumps of rotted flesh, charred flesh, and this is starting to get down into the rotted flesh and the charred flesh. There's a piece of broken charred bone sticking up through the dirt, and that's what that photograph is.
Detective, can you describe what you observed in States Exhibit 11C?
As we began digging down and the flesh and bone began coming out of the ground, we had our rubber gloves on, grab it out of the ground, and place it on the blue tarp that I described earlier. This is just a portion of some of the flesh and charred bone, broken bone that we had uncovered at that time. It still has some dirt on the charred flesh, but there's bone fragments, there's some more bone fragments, some bone there, and the rotted, charred flesh that was attached to that bone.
Detective, what did you observe in States Exhibit 11D?
When I testified earlier about the mass, the clump of flesh and bone that was placed into the melted green bucket, that's what you're looking at here. You can see the part of the plastic green bucket. There's parts of bone sticking out here. This area here is all burnt flesh, fatty tissue. There's organs that weren't completely burnt through all the way. Like it was just placed in the bucket and kind of stayed there. So we dug around that bucket the best we could. We would get in there and dig by hand with paintbrushes or anything that we can get. Underneath this bucket, you can start seeing the partial remains of a human skull underneath the melted bucket.
Detective, how long did this process take you?
Hours. Like I said, we were only able to get down there on our hands and knees for a couple minutes before we had to have somebody else come relieve us because of the smell.
Detective, what did you observe in States Exhibit 11E?
This is a close-up of the partial skull that was under the melted green bucket. It was a plat bucket, and you can see the white lettering. There's an L there, but the bucket itself was melted, and all that was stuffed inside, and underneath there was part of the top of the skull, and we also found a jawbone underneath this portion here that isn't depicted in that picture.
Detective, what did you observe in States Exhibit 11F?
After we removed that mass of flesh, after it broke into clumps and we tried to pick it up and it broke up, and we had to by hand pick everything up and put it onto the tarp. That's what was left. It was the moist soil And so we dug down a little bit more, found some teeth. But that is after we took the teeth and the flesh, everything out of the hole. That's what was left, was the moist soil. We dug down further to make sure that we had found everything, and there was nothing else after that.
And Detective, what do you observe in State's Exhibit 11G?
This was part of Tylee that was inside of the bucket that had broken up when we tried to move it onto the mat, or onto the tarp. There's bone, charred flesh, rotting flesh. There's part of the top of a skull here. The orbital sockets are there. That's the top of the skull. These are just some of the parts that we had to get out of the ground and placed onto the tarp.
Detective, I believe you testified earlier that on June 10th, you and Detective Ball followed the Fremont County coroner and took these remains to Ada County. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what did you do with them on June 10th?
June 10th, we dropped them off and left JJ and Tylee with the Ada County coroner in their custody. And we agreed to come back the next morning on June 11th to perform the autopsy.
Okay. And did you do that? Did you go back on June 11th?
We did.
Okay. What was the first thing you did when you got there on June 11th?
Initially, we met with the medical examiner, Dr. Garth Warren. We met in his office. He briefed us with what we were about to go through, kind of walked us through what was going to happen. And at that time, he walked us down a hall. We put on booties on our shoes. We had gloves. We signed in on the whiteboard, everybody that was inside the room. And at that time, Dr. Warren and his team brought out the black body bag that had contained the black plastic bag that we had taken out of the ground that day before.
Okay. What did you observe next?
They cut the seal on the body bag and unzipped the body bag, and it revealed the black plastic bag that had the duct tape. He placed that bag onto the metal table. It still had dirt on it from when we had taken it out of the ground. They took photographs, did whatever they need to do, and they cut down the center of the black plastic bag.
Okay. When they cut down that plastic bag, what did you observe?
I saw a little boy in red pajamas. He had a white plastic bag around his head, several layers of duct tape from his chin to his forehead area. His arms were duct tape with several layers of duct tape. His arms were folded like this across his chest. You guys see that? His feet were also duct taped and bound. He had a white and blue child's blanket placed on top of him.
Okay. What did you observe happen next?
Dr. Warren cut open the bag that was wrapped over JJ's head, exposing what was underneath. And underneath that white plastic bag, there was another layer of duct tape across his mouth from jawline to jawline.
And then what happened?
He then cut the duct tape away from his arms to expose his wrists and his forearms. And when he did that, there was also another level of duct tape wrapped around his wrists. So his wrists were bound this way. Yeah.
Did you remain for the entirety of J.J. Vallow's autopsy?
I did.
Once that duct tape was removed, what did you observe?
Through the videos and pictures that we had seen of JJ for the last 8 months, the nonstop looking, the tips coming in, everything we had obtained and looked at, I was able to recognize that same little boy lying on the table to be JJ Vallow. He had the same haircut, It was short on the sides, long brown hair on the top. So I recognized him as JJ.
Okay. Was there anything else that was that stood out to you during that autopsy?
His pajamas were soaked with body decomposition. He still had on his pull-up nighttime diaper. There was some visible bruising on his arms that the medical examiner had pointed out to us. That's all.
Okay. Detective, upon the completion of the autopsy of JJ Vallow, what did you do?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Upon the completion of JJ Vallow's autopsy, what did you do next?
Dr. Warren brought in the second set of remains of Tylee. He undid the body bag. Once he saw what was inside the body bag, he had advised us that there wasn't anything he was going to do that evening, that we can come back the next day. And so at that point, we left the coroner's office.
Okay. Detective, do you recognize those exhibits?
Yes, I do.
What do they purport to be?
JJ Vallow, in the condition that we first saw him after they cut open the black plastic bag.
So are these photos from the autopsy?
They are.
Okay. And you were there the entirety of the autopsy?
Yes, sir.
And you saw it with your own eyes?
Correct.
Are those exhibits 12A through E, true and accurate representations of what you witnessed that day?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state moves for admission of exhibits 12A through E.
All right. Is there any objection to states A through E, Exhibit 12?
No, Your Honor.
All right.
Detective, what did you observe in state's exhibit 12A?
This is the first time we saw JJ once they cut down the black plastic bag that revealed what was inside. That's JJ with the white plastic on his head. You can see where we originally cut the plastic when he was in the ground to reveal his brown hair. But the amount of duct tape over his face, over his arms, the body decomposition, is kind of what caught our attention.
Okay. Is that the blanket? Is the blanket you referred to earlier in that picture?
Yes, that's the blue and white child's blanket that was placed on top of him.
Detective, what did you observe in state's exhibit 12B?
That's the legs of JJ. He's still wearing the Skechers socks. Still has on the red pajama pants, and his ankles are also bound with duct tape.
Were you able to observe any decomposition fluid in that area that's shown in that picture?
Yes, it's hard to see in the picture, but the whole bottom half of his red pajamas were soaked with body decomposition.
Thank you. Detective, what did you observe in state's exhibit 12C?
This is after the medical examiner first cut down the white plastic bag. Like I testified earlier, he had a strip of duct tape around his mouth from jawline to jawline. As you can see, his skin's going through various stages of decomposition. But he was still recognizable with the brown hair and facial features that we had seen in the photographs for the last 8 months.
Detective, what did you observe in state's exhibit 12D?
That's the white plastic bag that was placed over JJ's head. It appeared to be the waffle-style type expandable trash bag that people normally put in their kitchen. It had a red drawstring. But that's what was over his head. And what you're looking at, there's pieces of duct tape that were attached to that. And this is just body decomposition that was inside the plastic bag from his face.
And what did you observe in state's exhibit 12E?
That's a picture of JJ, still with the duct tape around his mouth, just a close-up picture. Like I testified earlier, you could still see the long brown hair, the shape of his head. It was very easily to identify that little boy on the table as the one we had been looking for the last 8 months.
After the autopsy of JJ, did you do anything else in Ada County in regards to his remains?
I assisted Lieutenant Ron Ball with transporting various items from the autopsy to the Idaho State Lab the next day on June 12th.
Did you do anything further with any of the remains of Tylee Ryan in Ada County?
No.
Okay. Your Honor, the state has no further questions for Detective Hermosillo at this time. Due to the nature of this case, we may need to recall him at other times due to the nature of the investigation. But for purposes of today, we have no further questions.